The Rookie has changed a lot over the last 7 seasons, and in this video, I want to take the show back to its roots and rank every single episode from the first season of the show. And I'm telling you guys, this was really hard because there were so many good episodes in this season. Let's start at the way bottom of this list with the worst episode of the season. At number 20, we have episode 19, The Checklist. The main plot of this episode is about when Sergeant Gray informs rookies Lucy, Jackson, and Nolan that due to tightening the rules within the FTO program, they now have to take the lead on a specific set of crimes in 48 hours in order to qualify for the 6-month exam to move on from their probationary period. This creates a high-pressure situation where the rookies have to seek out specific incidents and crimes, while ignoring others in order to qualify for the exam. Even though the plot may sound interesting on paper, this episode is just flat out bad. Due to the procedure crackdown, viewers were able to see exactly where the rookies' priorities lie. And let's just say that Jackson was absolutely horrible in this episode. He was so focused and determined to finish his checklist that he was almost annoyed when he encountered any crime that wasn't on his list. And if it weren't for Lopez, he would have completely ignored those calls that didn't cater to his checklist. It was frustrating to see Jackson be more focused on finishing his checklist rather than being a good cop and helping people. And not to single Jackson out, because Lucy's point of view was bad too, as the 5 items in a row thing was just a cop-out and made everyone look bad. So with all of these things combined, it's easy to say that this is the worst episode in season 1. Next, at number 19, we have episode 13, Caught Stealing. The plot takes place after the LAPD raid a drug cartel's home, stopping them from transferring $1 million. Lucy, Jackson, and Nolan are now in charge of guarding this money until the money counters arrive. The next morning, they are informed that $250,000 is missing, and that they are now the prime suspects. The rookies are interrogated and take polygraphs before being cleared. Later, the cartel members who escaped during the raid attack Lucy, believing that she was the one who took the missing money, but it was actually her attacker who was responsible for taking the money. While this episode is in second to last place, it's not bad per se, it's just one I don't really like very much comparatively. The rookies' interrogation scenes were unnecessarily long, so it was easy for me to get bored very quickly. The other side plots also weren't very interesting either, so the only redeeming quality was that Lucy was an absolute badass in this episode. Landing at number 18 is episode 11, Redwood. This episode occurs when all of the LAPD officers are forced to come into work on their day off to keep the streets safe and clear for the vice president, who has made an unexpected visit to LA. The idea of the vice president in town sounds like it would be a fast-paced episode, but it was just okay, and I didn't really feel engaged when rewatching it. I'd say the 2 most interesting subplots of this episode are when Lucy gets pricked by a used syringe needle while trying to break up a fight,
Chen,
and Jackson and Lopez's gunshot wound victim. Lucy's plotline stood out in a particularly boring episode because even though she turned out okay, she could have been exposed to a number of different diseases. Although on paper the premise sounds exciting, it's sad to say that the rest of the episode felt pretty mundane comparatively for an episode about the vice president coming to town. Moving on to number 17, we have episode 6, The Hawk. The episode begins when Nolan reconnects with his old academy teacher, Jeremy Hawk, and finds out he's been having a hard time. Later, after talking to his wife, Nolan and Bishop learn that Hawk is wanted for domestic violence. When they go to arrest him, Hawk runs, and a citywide chase begins. Things get worse when they realize Hawk's son is in the car with him, believing that they are running away together. This episode was decent and definitely had its highlights, like the homicide call with the guy in the trunk, which was really funny.
the knife's on the workbench.
Or the plot with Jackson and Lopez where they investigate a shooting victim who's lying about how they really got shot. Overall, the episode's main plot was very underwhelming as it relies heavily on action-packed scenes, leaving little room for character-driven moments. But even with the episode's main plot lacking, Hawk being a villain was a good twist, as you wouldn't have expected Nolan's friend to be a criminal, which is why this episode is at number 17. Next, at number 16, we have episode 5, The Roundup. This episode takes place when Nolan struggles to deal with his breakup with Lucy, right as the LAPD officers start their annual roundup competition to see who can get the most arrests in a single shift. Tim is very competitive and plans to win, so much that he bribes Nell to give him the best calls. Jackson is even more eager to win because he wants to prove himself as a capable police officer, while Nolan and Bishop refuse to play entirely. The roundup game as a whole is a pretty interesting concept and adds a completely different dynamic to the shift. However, the problem with this episode is that the game brought out the worst in a lot of characters, specifically Tim and Jackson. Tim's obsession with winning led him to bribe Nell, showing that he's willing to go against standard policing procedure for a game and potentially jeopardizing his work. And Jackson's eagerness to win and aim for the top score makes him focus entirely on the competition, causing him to neglect real police work and showing little empathy. This made him appear more interested in advancing his career rather than helping people. So it's easy to say that seeing these characters act in an undesirable way impacted the episode's ranking on this list. Coming in at number 15, we have episode 18, Homefront. The main plot focuses on Officer Talia Bishop as we get a deeper look into her past. It all starts when a detective is arrested by Internal Affairs for lying on the witness stand, which leads to 3 criminals being released early from prison. The LAPD officers are assigned to check in on each of them, as Lopez and Jackson visit one, Tim and Lucy check on another, and Nolan and Bishop are sent to follow up with the third, Terry Wright. During their visit, Bishop unexpectedly reunites with Dylan, her former foster brother, who's a felon. But later, things take an unexpected turn when Dylan and Terry kidnap her.
Now you're going back to prison.
I don't think so.
Ultimately, and luckily, Bishop is left unharmed after the incident. After returning to the station, she admits to Sergeant Gray that she lied on her application to the police academy by hiding her connection to Dylan, since LAPD officers aren't allowed to have close family ties to convicted felons. This episode is decent overall. We got to see Lopez's relationship evolving, so you gotta love that. Though I definitely was not a fan of the way that Nolan acted in this episode. He was being a complete moron to his lawyer for assuming he wasn't capable of his job just because he was young. This was completely out of character for Nolan, considering people were just judging him for his age when he first joined the LAPD. But I would say the funniest thing about this episode is how dramatic and chaotic it all is. And meanwhile, Tim and Lucy are just having fun at paintball. Even though nothing about this episode stands out in particular, it isn't necessarily bad either, which is why it landed at the number 15 spot. Moving on to number 14, we have episode 1, Pilot, the one that started it all. The episode begins when newly divorced 45-year-old John Nolan helps stop a bank robbery in his hometown Foxborough, Pennsylvania. 9 months later, wanting a fresh start, he moves to Los Angeles and joins the LAPD. He is then assigned to the Mid-Wilshire Division and was met with doubt due to his age. He is especially criticized by his watch commander, Sergeant Gray, who warns Nolan he'll do everything he can to push him out. Nolan is teamed up with his new training officer, Talia Bishop, while rookies Jackson West and Lucy Chen are paired with Angela Lopez and Tim Bradford. Jackson feels immense pressure to live up to his father's legacy, while Lucy is focused on hiding her secret relationship with Nolan, her fellow rookie. This episode is a great introduction to the show, as it not only introduces the main characters, but it highlights the rookies' weak spots and early struggles. With Nolan being overly ambitious, Jackson freezing during shootouts, and Tim's aggressiveness with his so-called Tim test, it shows the challenges the rookies will face with their TOs and as new officers.
I've been shot.
What?
Where are you, Boot?
What?
This episode also does a good job introducing the storyline with Tim and his wife Isabel, who struggles with substance abuse. And we get to see a softer side to Tim after he and Isabel unexpectedly reunite at a gas station after not seeing each other for a while. Cholin, however, was not a good introduction as the first official couple on the show, simply because they just were not a good match. Overall though, with a few critiques, this episode is a strong introduction to the series and its characters. Following the pilot at number 13, we have episode 2, Crash Course. This episode's plot picks up right after the previous episode, with Nolan struggling to balance his instincts as a civilian with his duties as a police officer, while Jackson must confront his failures after he was questioned for freezing up and not firing his gun during a recent call. As for Lucy, she gets temporarily assigned to a new and lazier training officer while Tim recovers from his gunshot wound. This episode is also one of the funniest in the season, with Nolan repeatedly damaging the shop, forcing him and Bishop to ride in an older car instead, or Jackson's chaotic arrest of a guy on PCP. Nolan also got his first big W on the job for following his instincts while working on the case. The woman that Nolan and Bishop arrested that was involved with the meth dealer was also really funny, since she just casually admitted to potentially murdering someone.
The kid I stabbed said this was Fungus's car, lit it up, so he showed. Turn around. What? Hey!
The only major downside of this episode, and this is pretty major, is that I wasn't a fan of the storyline with Lucy and her new TO. Although it sounded like it would be interesting to see a different dynamic outside of her usual pairing with Tim, it ultimately ended up being very underwhelming. But besides that, the episode is pretty solid. Next at number 12, we have episode 17, The Shakeup. The main plot occurs when Nolan and Tim are put on protective detail for a former Border Patrol agent, during which a major earthquake hits the city, throwing everything into chaos. At the Mid-Wilshire station, Gray works hard to coordinate the department's emergency response while officers patrol the city. Things then take a sharp turn when Nolan and Tim are attacked at the safe house by members of the cartel, and even the patrol agent they were protecting. Meanwhile, Lucy faces a family dilemma when her dad ends up in the hospital with a broken arm. She later confronts him after learning that one of his patients was the one who broke his arm. Lucy then suggests that she arrest him, but her father disagreed, believing that arresting anyone with mental illness does more harm than good, as it truly doesn't help. Despite his wishes, Lucy arrests the patient, leaving her father disappointed in her decision. This episode was very interesting and had multiple good plot lines, as it was the first really big disaster episode of the show. Nolan and Tim were an awesome duo as well, and it was nice seeing them work closely together for the first time. I was not a fan of Lucy's dad though, as it seems like he just wasn't supportive of her career as a police officer and struggled to see things from Lucy's perspective. She was just trying to stand up for him and seek justice as a caring daughter, but he completely dismissed her feelings. And while it's impossible to replace Captain Anderson, I did not like the new captain at all. He absolutely drove me nuts, and I'm honestly glad that he left. So I'd say the biggest flaws of this episode are having two extremely dislikable characters. Coming in at number 11, we have episode 4, The Switch. The episode's main plot starts when Sergeant Gray tests the rookies by assigning them new TOs, pairing Nolan with Lopez, Jackson with Bradford, and Lucy with Bishop. He tasks the rookies with gaining insight into their new TO's personal lives. Lopez takes Nolan to court, and he ends up chasing an escaped prisoner. Tim, however, learns about Jackson's struggles with freezing during shootouts. To help him, he takes Jackson to meet an agoraphobe who gives him advice on facing his fears. Meanwhile, Lucy defends her relationship with Nolan to Bishop, who has been constantly pressuring her to end things with him. Ultimately, this led to Nolan and Lucy finally breaking things off. The TO switch was a great idea, as it was cool to see different dynamics between the rookies outside of their usual pairings. Tim helping Jackson start to overcome his freezing even when he didn't have to was great character development for both of them, and it was nice to see Jackson start to become more confident in his career. What was also nice was to see the long overdue Cholin breakup, and to be honest, it's one of the reasons why this episode is ranked at the number 11 spot. Moving on, at the number 10 spot, we have episode 3, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The episode starts off with Nolan and Bishop chasing a group of thieves, during which Nolan loses the bag of stolen money when a street performer runs off with it. Later, the station learns that the thieves are part of a gang who has pulled off a string of heists, and they begin searching for the remaining gang members. Meanwhile, Lucy worries about Tim as he adjusts to being back on duty after being shot, while also trying to help his wife Isabel. In fact, later in the episode, Isabel reveals to Lucy that she used to be a narcotics cop, which was shocking to hear. Elsewhere, an arrest of a former college athlete sparks a conversation between Jackson and Lopez about alternative careers to police work. This was a good episode that highlighted the heavy moral dilemma that Tim had to face with his wife on whether to supply her with Narcan or not. Tim and Isabel's scenes together were also very intense, specifically their conversation at the hospital after she OD'd. This was kind of hard to watch, but that was in a good way. And seeing Nolan and Bishop deal with the emotional aftermath of arresting the father right in front of his child made the situation especially heartbreaking. Knowing that even if you've been on the job for years like Bishop, things like that never get any easier. So overall, this episode stands out for its emotional depth as the characters were faced with having to make extremely tough decisions. Next, at number 9, we have episode 10, Flesh and Blood. The episode starts at morning roll call, where Anderson announces that she will ride along with Lucy, while Gray will partner with Nolan, and Tim and Bishop will partner with each other. Not long after, Nolan's son, Henry, comes to visit him, and Gray's daughter, Dominique, comes to start an internship. Henry and Dominique quickly bond over their concern about their dad's line of work. At the same time, Tim and Bishop clash over procedure, as they both are used to calling the shots and being in charge of their rookies since rising through the ranks. This was a good episode, as once again, it was nice to see different dynamics between the officers outside of their usual pairings. Tim and Bishop were hilarious together, especially after Tim got sprayed by the skunk. For the most part, the plots were pretty mundane outside of the gas line plot, but uneventful plots are better than crazy, unbelievable ones. And seeing Wesley introduced as Angela's love interest is a huge highlight since they are my favorite couple on the show. So it's safe to say that this episode is deserving of its number 9 spot. Moving on to number 8, we have episode 12, Heartbreak. In this Valentine's Day episode, Tim takes the day off to visit Isabel at rehab, where he decides to officially end their relationship. Meanwhile, Nolan saves a recently widowed woman, who then becomes determined to have a relationship with him. At the hospital, Jackson connects with a male nurse, marking the beginning of his first love interest on the show. As Angela starts becoming suspicious of her boyfriend Wesley, she secretly goes through his phone and finds a dinner reservation with a girl named Melanie, leading her to believe he's cheating on her. Later, when she confronts him, she finds out that Melanie is just his stepmother, whom he was taking out to dinner for Valentine's Day. After work, Nolan decides he wants to make the most out of his first Valentine's Day as a single man in years, and throws a small get-together at his house with Bishop and Ben. Nolan's storyline in this episode was absolutely crazy, and the girl who was obsessed with him was even crazier. The show as a whole also did an amazing job of introducing Jackson as a well-written gay character, which is great representation for LGBTQ. As for downsides, I'm upset that we never found out who the married man that Bishop was seeing is. Tim was also being a bit of a dweebus in this episode, but neither of those things take away from the overall quality. Landing at number 7, we have episode 7, The Ride Along. The episode begins when Nolan and Bishop are assigned Hollywood director Rupert Payne for a ride-along to research his new film. Despite Gray's orders to keep him away from any dangerous situations, Payne observes Nolan and Bishop de-escalating a situation involving a mentally impaired man, which leads to a dangerous situation when Rupert tries to film the young man's family. Meanwhile, Jackson tells Lopez that she is being considered for detective, which makes her attempt to leverage low-scale criminals into giving up larger-scale ones. Later, Tim's wife Isabel is arrested in a drug bust, forcing him to once again choose between his wife and his duty as a cop. I personally really liked this episode, but I do have a love-hate relationship with Payne. I admire his desire to see the reality of actual police work, but at the end of the day, he is an ass, and there's no way around it.
What the hell you doing?
This is so compelling.
Compelling. That camera.
Hey guys, you do not want to escalate this.
Seeing Tim face a dilemma of whether to protect his wife and obstruct a police investigation, potentially costing him his career, or let his wife go to jail was tough to watch. Even though he ultimately ended up choosing the latter, which I think was the right decision in the end. The final scene with Bishop and Angela supporting Tim in the car after Isabel's arrest was really sweet, and it was wholesome to see his fellow TO show up for him after he had a rough day. Overall, this episode had minimal critiques, other than Payne, which is why it's so high on this list. Coming in at number 6, we have episode 14, Plain Clothes Day. The episode starts when the rookies undergo Plain Clothes Day, where their TOs ride with them out of uniform but do not assist them with any police work. Jackson is eager to break his father's records but gets stuck doing minuscule tasks at the station for most of the day. Lucy's plainclothes day is not off to a good start after responding to a noise complaint about a dog, and the owner files a complaint on Lucy for threatening him. But things start to turn around after she redeems herself by arresting the dog owner for murdering the woman who filed the noise complaint. Meanwhile, Nolan has his own struggles as well, after letting a suspect run away and brushing off a distressed woman with questions about credit card tracking, only to find out she was kidnapped by her abusive husband. In the end, Talia decides to step in and help Nolan, eventually arresting the husband and freeing the woman. This episode was great, and it was really fun to watch the rookies make mistakes and struggle during their plainclothes day. All the plots were interesting as well, though some stood out more than others, such as the Lucy and Rodney plot involving the dog. And as usual, it's no surprise that Lucy was a total badass in this episode, so gotta give her credit for that too. Moving on to the top 5. At number 5, we have episode 9, Standoff. The episode begins as Nolan manages to fight off his attacker from the previous episode. Meanwhile, Tim, Angela, and Bishop discover Isabel in a dumpster with a gunshot wound to the head, after a drug deal with her and an informant goes wrong. Tim, Lucy, Jackson, Angela, and Bishop all go to an apartment building to find Vance, the drug dealer who shot Isabel and left her for dead. Things start to go sideways as they end up in a shootout with Vance and his men, during which Lucy helps deliver Vance's girlfriend's baby while Jackson disables the power to a frequency jammer in order for Bishop to call for backup. While Vance and his men break into the apartment to get his girlfriend, a fight breaks out with Tim and Lucy. Eventually, Nolan, Commander West, and the SWAT team arrive just in time to arrest Vance and his men. Overall, this is a great, suspenseful episode with not a single boring minute of runtime, as Marcus Vance was a terrific villain. Nolan also had a major W in this episode, which is also nice to see. With such a high stakes episode, I'm glad to put it at the number 5 spot. Next, at number 4, we have episode 20, Free Fall. This episode starts as the rookies prepare for a crucial exam that will determine who advances to the next stage of their careers. Nolan and Bishop respond to a murder scene that quickly escalates when they discover that the victim is linked to a potential terrorist attack involving a weaponized virus. This threat puts the entire city at risk, postponing the rookie's exam and putting a strain on Nolan's personal life. During the investigation, Tim is potentially exposed to this virus, while Lopez and Jackson manage to stop a second suspect and rescue passengers on a city bus. After the virus is contained, Tim receives an experimental vaccine, but soon after leaving the house, he unexpectedly collapsed, ending the season on a cliffhanger. This was an insane episode in the best way possible. This was also the first episode that was seen as jumping the shark by some, but I disagree with that because there's a lot worse. The Lucy and Tim scenes were great and intense. It was heartbreaking to see Lucy worry about him. All of the characters were at the very least decent in this episode, as none of them did anything that completely annoyed me. Although Jessica should have warned Nolan about the virus for the sake of his son, I also understand why she didn't. Overall, this episode was wild and delivered suspenseful, emotional moments, easily making it one of the most unforgettable episodes of the season, and it made a very good rewatch. Coming in at number 3, we have episode 15, Manhunt. The chaos of this episode begins after a prisoner transport van crashes, causing several dangerous inmates to escape into the streets of Los Angeles. In response, LAPD officers quickly spread out to catch them. While doing so, Nolan helps a wounded deputy, but then has to fight off one of the prisoners before Jackson and Lopez show up. Meanwhile, Tim and Lucy arrest another prisoner while Jackson and Lopez catch prisoner Oscar Hutchinson in a parking garage. Later, Nolan and Bishop do a traffic stop and find one of the prisoners hiding in the trunk holding the driver's daughter hostage. The police later arrest the prisoner while Nolan handles another hostage situation involving the last one. This was such an intense, action-packed episode, with Sean Mayer delivering an amazing performance as Caleb Jost, and Nolan holding his own during the intense hostage situation. This episode also introduced my favorite long-running villain, Oscar Hutchinson, who is a big reason why this episode ranks at number 3. Next, at the number 2 spot, we have episode 8, Time of Death. This episode begins with Nolan chasing down a robbery suspect, where he's forced to shoot and kill the man in self-defense. Much of this episode focuses on the emotional aftermath as Nolan deals with the weight of taking a life. Meanwhile, Tim's wife, Isabel, returns as a confidential informant for a mission to gather evidence on a major drug trafficker. But the deal suddenly goes wrong when her wire cuts out and she disappears, presumably being taken. Later that night, Lucy gives Nolan a ride home from the station and ends up staying over. But things take a dark turn when the brother of the man Nolan shot breaks into his house and attacks him. The episode then ends on a tense cliffhanger, with Nolan being held at gunpoint and hearing gunshots off screen. This was an intense episode that almost had me thinking Nolan's career was over. But after all of the chaos, it was wholesome to see everyone backing Nolan up during the interrogation process. And let's not forget about that suspenseful ending, as it was a crazy way to end the episode. And we can just forget the whole Cholin part since the rest of the episode was absolutely amazing. And finally, taking the #1 spot as the best episode of season 1, we have episode 16, Greenlight. The episode's main plot begins with Nolan arresting a woman and her dress's shoulder strap accidentally breaks, embarrassing her. After a gunman attempts to kill Nolan that evening, Nolan learns that a hit has been put on his life, ordered by the boyfriend of the woman he arrested earlier, Cole Midas, whose father, Leonard, is the leader of a violent gang called the Southern Front. After doing some soul searching, Nolan returns to work the next morning and is partnered with Captain Anderson to keep him safe. Officers then seize millions of the gang's assets as leverage to get Leonard to call off the hit, which works. However, Cole and his men capture Nolan and Anderson anyway, and although she's able to free herself and save Nolan, she gets shot and killed by Cole. Nolan then sits with Anderson's body as Tim, Talia, Lucy, Lopez, Jackson, and the other LAPD members arrive to salute Anderson. Eventually, at the end of the episode, an ambush is set and Cole gets arrested by Nolan. This was an amazing, heartfelt episode and is probably in my top 3 favorite episodes in the entire series. This episode highlighted that the show has no rules and they can do absolutely anything they want. I mean, I actually cried when Anderson died since I really loved her character, but ultimately, her death gave Nolan the perspective he needed for the job, and it contributed a lot to the growth of his character. So even though this episode was absolutely heartbreaking, I am proud to put it as the best episode in season 1 of The Rookie. That was every single episode from season 1 ranked from worst to best. Make sure to subscribe and leave a like if you want me to do season 2 next. Thanks for watching.